Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to my post-race reaction for the Australian or Albert Park GP race. What was your thoughts on this season opener for Formula One in 2025? I thought it was a fabulous race. I thought it was on the edge for almost from the lights out to the end of the race. There was always something going on, some strategy in play, some thought about someone being able to take the lead, or what tires they should be on, when the rain was going to come, if they should be switching to intermediates or the full wets, or is this something they should stay out on the slicks. It was a very crazy, chaotic race from the very beginning, when drivers were ditching it in the formation lap, to the very end when the rain was coming down again and causing more chaos and slides and spins and into the wall, and how all of this played together and trying to formulate a full race. Now, it's just kind of strange because we don't get that many overtakes in this situation, but it was on the edge, fun time for me, and I enjoyed it so much. I would probably give it a 10 out of 10. But what was your thoughts? And just like last year, I will start off with the back of the pack and work my way forward, and I will give you a little bit of details on each driver as I know what happened to them or what kind of played out in the race. As we'll start off in that 20th position with Isaac Haijar, who qualified in 11th. So he did a really good job on qualifying, but as that rain hit, he was a little bit struggling a little bit, and just caught him off guard in that little wet line and that painted line on the track, and kind of just catching him off guard and spinning that car and putting him in that wall on that formation lap. So that really hurt him tremendously. I'm sure emotionally he's going to have to pick himself back up and get himself back on track for the China race. But I think he did a really good job, and I think he can hold his head up high for that qualifying, doing really well on all those sessions. So I think he'll be back strong, and he'll learn from this and kind of move forward. I think this is, being on the wets for the first time in that Formula One is a little bit tricky for these rookies. So hopefully he can fairly well in the rest of the season. And the same thing kind of happens for Jack Doohan, who ended up, qualifying at 14th, and then dropping down to that 19th spot after he did spin himself into this run. It made it a little harder for him as he was actually in the race, and he was doing a fairly good job, but didn't quite make it to where he wanted it to be. And with all that pressure on him and that seat at that Alpine, it's going to be harder for him, I think, to pick himself back up and dust himself off and just put that aside and move forward. But hopefully he can do that and show what he can do in the next race. Now we get Carlos Sainz, who again was going around and doing decently and had a decent qualifying in that Williams in that 10th spot. Not quite as good as his teammate, but still up there in that running. And then he actually had some issues, and I'm not sure. I think that was some torque issues in that car. I think they're working on that to see if there's something that actually caused that issue that caught him off guard and made him spin into the wall. And then we have, of course, Fernando Alonso, who qualified in 12th and ended up in 17th after he hit the wall on lap 34 in turn 7 and caused a safety car. He was up one position at the very beginning of the race, but didn't having that collision with the wall after he spun, trying to get the wet tire scenario going for him. And that kind of interesting as these experienced drivers are having some issues in this race as well as the rookies. And about the same time, you had Gabriel Borletto in that stake kick F1 car, qualified 15th, doing decent for that stake vehicle, doing really good in the race, keeping it up in there, being really fast, out-qualified his teammate, did a really good job, but then he caught that white line, and it almost looked like something broke on that suspension if you're looking at that video, so I'm hoping that they'll give you a little bit more details on that. As he spun around and hit the wall, it looked like that back left tire was just out of whack. And then you have Liam Lawson, who qualified in 18th, was having a struggle all weekend, really, and ended up in 15th, but he was a DNF as well. I have him basically passing Ocon on lap 20 for 15th, and then he hit that wall in turn 2 on lap 47 and caused another safety car. He went to lap 33 on a set of intermediates before switching to a set of mediums. And that medium is what caught him off when that rain started kicking back in. He had a little bit slicker tire, and that wet road didn't play well for him. Carried it a little bit too long, I think, for him on that medium before trying to switch back to intermediate or wet tire. He did also gain a spot at the very beginning of the race, so he did a decent job there, even though he's in the back of the field. Starting from the pit lane, I think he'll get his feet back under him next week when it's a little bit better on that track that he's more used to. And then we have Oliver Behrman, who qualified, or didn't qualify in this case, to 20th position, who was able to get back into that racing order by the powers that be after spinning and causing a collision on that free practice 1, missing free practice 2, and then coming back out at the very beginning of free practice 3 and messing that up, just causing all kinds of headaches, and then having a gearbox issue on that qualifying session. So he didn't even get to qualify. So he was end up starting from the pit lane, working his way in, had a decent run, not being able to crash in all these really tricky conditions after having some issues at the very beginning in those practice sessions. So I think he's can hold his head up high. He may not have done as well as he would have liked, but I think he was doing pretty well. Kind of right there in the back of his teammate on those positions, so they at least get some data for that Haas moving forward and trying to get that and develop that Haas to be more competitive to those racing bulls. And the same thing kind of goes for Esteban Ocon. He qualified in 19th and made it up to 13th. He did gain 3 positions on the start of the race, so he did a really good start of this race. Kind of went to lap 39 on a set of intermediates before switching to a set of mediums. And then he switched to another set of intermediates on lap 46. I have him, doing a really good job and keeping up with everything going around him, kind of staying out of trouble, really working his way into this all. Then you have Yuki Tsunoda, who's I'm sure is kicking himself with that strategy, trying to figure out exactly what he did wrong in this running. He did an excellent job on qualifying, getting all the way up into that 5th marker to start this race off, and dropped back to 12th on that last stint, trying to figure out where to switch back to those intermediate tires. Went a little bit long and kind of cost him some time and some positions. And then he kind of got stuck in that running and then ended up losing a couple of positions as well in that running. He went to lap 33 on a set of intermediates before switching to a set of mediums, and went to lap 47 before switching back to that intermediate. So just a little bit long on that last set of mediums before switching to that intermediates. He did lose his position at the very start of the race. He was able to, stay up there and do some really good points for most of the race. And it was just that last stint that he was really having trouble with. When that rain came back and kicked back in, and trying to figure out where they wanted to switch back to the intermediates or whether they should have stayed out and weathered that, which in the hindsight, yes, they should have switched, but I think they stayed off a little bit long on that decision, and that cost him those positions where he couldn't really regain those at that end of the race. Then you have Pierre Gasly, who's kind of heartbreaking in that sense too. He did a decent job in qualifying at 9th, but fell back into that 11th, just outside the points. I have Pierre Gasly lap 46 for that 3rd position at one point in this race. He was really doing good, kind of staying in that point range, doing fairly well until the very end, where he made that one mistake and let the 2 Ferraris past him, which pushed him outside those points, especially with Oscar coming up back through that ranking as well. This gets us to the top 10. So where we have Lewis Hamilton in that Ferrari, jumping into that Ferrari, the first race of his season on Ferrari, qualifying in 8th. So I know he wanted to do a little bit better than that, but he's still trying to learn all the buttons on that steering wheel, on how to talk to the engineers, as he's had a nice long stint with Mercedes and knew all the workings and how everything played out, and almost could, foresee how everything was going. Now jumping into a new team, he's having to readjust all of that. Learn how that car performs, getting him to that right data that he needs to change the car to make it to his liking. So I think he did a decent job, just behind his teammate on qualifying in that 8th position, not where the Ferrari wants to be, but doing a decent job there. Unfortunately, he dropped down to 10th. The Ferraris kind of stayed out a little bit long, so that pushed them back down the field where they had to regain some positions and get some of those lower end points. I know he wasn't real happy where he ended up, but overall I think the process for him is doing decent. Now, Oscar Piastri did an excellent job. He came out pushing pressure on his teammate and kind of worked through all of that. Where the weather conditions were switching back and forth, he was kind of right there, in that running. Yes, he did lose his spot to Max Verstappen on the first lap, but was able to put pressure and gain that position back, and then making that mistake right behind his teammate, who made the mistake, but he ended up losing it on the coming back onto the track, which cost him to slide all the way over to the other side of the track and into the grass, and he almost got stuck, but he was persistent, and that's really good, and he was able to back that car out, even though he lost tons of time, back that car back out onto the track eventually, even though initially the people had him marked as a DNF. He was able to get that car under his own working back onto the track and pull himself back up into the points. He did pass Max on lap 17 for that second position after losing it on that first lap. And then he passed Ocon on lap 52 for 12th. He passed Yuki on lap 53 for 11th. He passed Gasly on lap 55 for 10th. And then he passed Hamilton on lap 57 for that final position. So he came back strong. So you could really see that he can hook that McLaren up and do really well once he gets in that position. So I look forward to seeing him put pressure on Lando and figure out how that all plays out for those lead positions in the future. Then we come to the other Ferrari, Charles Leclerc, who qualified in 7th and ended up in 8th. He basically passed Gasly on lap 54 for 9th. There's a big action there, and then he did gain 2 positions at the very start of the race, which helped elevate him up into that running as well. Issues with his drink holder, I think, pouring water into his seat, so hopefully that didn't distract him too much, but that could have done some issues in his concentration with all of the other hectic things going around him in this race. Then we get a surprise for me. Nico Hülkenberg, qualified in 17th and behind his teammate even, but made it all the way up to 7th in this running, gaining really good points for Sauber Kick, however you want to say that team. He's really good running. They had a really struggle last year, waited to almost to the very end of the season before gaining points. So this is really good visibility, and hopefully this is just things to come for them and that running, gaining and taking advantage of those weird races and gaining the most points that they can in this running. He did gain a total of 4 spots the very first lap, so he did a really good start, launching himself into that space, keeping him out of trouble, as again I think was really well. Went to lap 33 on a set of intermediates before switching to a set of mediums, and then went to lap 44 on those mediums before switching back to that intermediate. Keeping himself into that running, getting set good points in this race. Then we get Lance Stroll, who qualified in 13th. Not the greatest qualifying, but he made it all the way up to 6th in this running, gaining really good points for Aston Martin, even though his teammate was able to go around and then, of course, spin out and hit the wall. Lance Stroll held it together and made a good run, got some good haul of points. He went out initially on those full wets, then on that formation lap when they came back in after Isaac Hajjar, crashed, he decided that that wasn't the right, play, and so he went back to a set of intermediates on that run, like everybody else, and then went out and did that 33 laps on that set of intermediates before switching to a set of hards. And then we get Alex Albon, who qualified in 6th. A really great job for that Williams. Kind of surprised most of us. That Williams didn't think that Williams was going to be quite as high up in the ranking as they did, and ended up gaining a spot into that 5th position overall. I have him doing a really good job in this running, even though he did lose a spot at the very beginning of the race. Keeping himself out of trouble, keeping him in that running. Hopefully they can figure out what happened to his teammate and fix whatever issue that was, that he said that torque jump in that car that made him spin out. If that was just driver error or if that was actually some kind of mechanical or computer glitch that caused that, we'll have to wait and see. Really good running for Albon. As I said, keeping him up there in that point positions, not causing any issues, not getting in the way. Good job for Alex Albon. And then the star of the show, in most people's view, is Kimi Antonelli, who qualified in 16th and ended up in 4th. Did an excellent job. I have a new respect for Kimi Antonelli. I was not quite as expecting quite the actual run. I knew he's decent and fairly good, but he was really showing his worth in this race. Really shined all the way through this race from the beginning to the end, even though he didn't qualify where he should have been next to his teammate. He was able to make up that ground during the race, gaining 2 positions on the very start of the race. But I have him passing Hulkenberg on lap 15 for 12th. Then he spun and had to pass him again on lap 18 for that 12th position. Passed Stroll on lap 23 for 11th. Passed Alonso on lap 34 for 10th. Passed Stroll on lap 46 for 10th. And then passed Albon on lap 56 for 4th. So really good job for him. A lot of passing all the way through the race, not just at the very end, and he kind of went through the whole spectrum on this from the very beginning to the end. So I really shine what he could do and keep himself out of trouble when all those other rookies were actually causing mistakes and spinning out, dropping back in the field, hitting the wall, or some other issues that they caused. So he really shined in that regard by not making those drastic mistakes and being able to pull himself up and get excellent points right alongside his teammate, George Russell, who came in on that 3rd position after qualifying in 4th. So George Russell had a nice clean race. Didn't really have any other issues. Didn't really have to pass anybody in general, but had a clean race, keeping it out of the trouble, keeping it out of the wall, in all those tricky conditions. He went to lap 34 on a set of intermediates before switching to a set of hards, and then went to lap 44 like his teammate before switching back to that set of intermediates, and ended up in that 3rd position. I know he was kind of disappointed because he was kind of lagging behind, Max Verstappen and the 2 McLaren drivers. And so there's still some work to be done in that Mercedes to see if they can get them competitive to that front running pack. And we'll see if they can do that in the next few races, or if they have to wait before a bigger upgrade comes to be a little bit more competitive in that running. Then we have Max Verstappen, who qualified in 3rd and gained a position and went to 2nd, basically keeping everything up. Gained a position at the very start of the race by passing Oscar Piastri. Really good start, had to be blocked, and just kind of kept it in there, putting pressure on Lando. As we go through all of this situation, really saying he was having a little struggling on those tires that worked, where that McLaren seemed to be a lot more smooth, but he ended up being back in his race and trying to figure out the weather conditions and played those decently in that regard. I think he said it wouldn't have mattered if it was a lap before or lap after in that regard. He would have probably still ended up in 2nd position. Pressure at the very end to keep him behind in that running. I know it's one thing to catch up and another thing to pass, especially in these tricky, wet, dry conditions. So we'll have to keep that in mind, but did an excellent job in that Red Bull, I think. And then, of course, we have Lando Norris, who, was really good drive. He had a decent start, but had to, block Max on that start of the race to keep him behind. And then he went off on turn 13, but still was able to keep the lead as his teammate spun out behind him. Basically led the race from the beginning to end. Got the fastest lap, got the driver of the day because he was able to keep that pressure from Max Verstappen behind him, really, showing what he's, learned in the last season and how he grew. Hopefully he can carry that forward into the coming races and really see that competitiveness. Even if he doesn't get the pole position, maybe he can put some pressure on the person in pole and cause some, back and forth in that front position. And I think that's one of the reasons that I like this race so much, is there was always that thought of that first position, being overtaken, and just see how crazy it was. We had a safety car on lap two that went through lap 7. And I had another safety car that came out in lap 34 that went to 41, and had a third safety car that came out on lap 47 that went to 51. So we had 3 safety car conditions and fairly decent safety car runs. And then give you a little bit more detail on Lando Norris and how well he did on lap 5. And during this is safety car run, he was 0.9 seconds ahead of Max. And by lap 10, he was 1.8 seconds ahead of Max. On lap 20, he was 2.9 seconds ahead of Oscar. On lap 35, He was 3.6 seconds ahead of Oscar, and that was back the very first start of that another safety car run. Lap 45, this is where they pitted just before that, so Max came out in the lead and was 7.7 seconds ahead of Hamilton in that time because of the McLaren's pitting. And then he was able to come back and be, that 1.9 seconds ahead of, Max at the very end. So really good run from Lando and all of this. Really good job of keeping everything behind. Deserves driver of the day. If it wasn't for him, I'd probably give it to Kimi Antonelli, or as a runner-up, potentially Nico Hulkenberg and that Sauber, as they weren't really showing that in all of the runnings, but still was able to push it up into those points fairly easily. So this gets us to our driver standing. So Lando comes out in the lead with 25 points, with Max in that second position with 18. Of course, this is just the running order of how they came across that finish line. And so we're not expecting a whole lot of input or thought pattern into this as we see these things. And what does this mean for the constructors' standings? Well, it means that McLaren is in the lead with 27 points, and Mercedes is just behind them with the exact same number of points, with those two drivers coming in, gaining points. So they're right tied with McLaren, basically for that first running position, but officially they are in second, with Red Bull coming in with 18 points in third, Williams with 10 points in fourth, Aston Martin with 8. That kicks Sauber in with 6 points. Ferrari way back in seventh with 5 points. And then we have Alpine, the Racing Bulls, and Haas yet to score. So we'll have to see how that plays out in the next few races and see if they can get some points on the board. So what is coming up next? We have the China GP race, coming up next weekend. But of course, right before that, we have the sprint race. And yes, we already have a sprint race for the 2025 season, and it is in China. So it will be on March 21st. According to my calendars on the time schedule, so watch out for that. Will be have a length of 3.387 miles for this circuit, and be running about 19 laps for a total sprint distance of 64.355 miles. And the lap record holder is still Michael Schumacher from 2004 with 1 minute 32.238 seconds, and it was first introduced in 2004. Until then, I will see you on the grid, and farewell.